Can't do. Your limits and your strengths.
Okay, so having your own awareness, what your own blinders are, asking for help, knowing that that can build on whatever your gifts are, and to be able to utilize the gifts of others as well. Okay? Yes?
Anticipating the divine.
Okay.
You're not the only one there.
All right, anticipating and calling upon and utilizing the divine.
Creating an affirming environment where all can contribute.
Okay, creating a affirming environment where all can contribute, yes?
Good physical health and a good night's rest help
Yeah.
a lot.
Okay, all right, good, yes.
Cheerleaders.
Cheerleaders, having cheerleaders, people that cheer you on. Yep, okay. Any other things that help build that capacity for resilience in us as people of the church during this landscape, yeah. Prayer, okay, prayer. And being a prayerful people. Yes, yes.
Faith-based relationships.
Faith-based relationships. Yeah.
I think seeing my work as working in a mission field instead of as a maintenance minister helps me a lot.
Yeah, okay. This work as a mission field rather than just maintenance. Yeah. And it helps you be resilient. Why does that help you in your resilience? Just say a little more about that.
Why does it help in resilience?
Yeah. What is it about that shifts your perspective? And
Because I came into a church in which maintenance was the thing they did. And I failed at everything when I was trying to maintain. So,
right.
So I'm not doing maintenance.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
But you are good at the mission field because?
Because it's an opportunity to respond to our context.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Thank you.
I was thinking realism would be important, that we can get good data regarding the actual issues confronting us.
Yeah.
Which relates to faith-based relationships where we can get good feedback from trusted friends. And things are never always one thing.
Yeah.
Or it's never just one thing.
Okay.
And never use absolutes.
Okay, so realism. Realism, getting data, grounding our assessments about something in some real data, some real understanding about things, rather than just going with our assessment as if it were pure fact.
Non-faith.
Non-faith.
Getting out of the church bubble.
Okay, getting out of the church bubble helps with resilience. Yes, absolutely. And having relationships outside of the church. We need opportunities, and we strongly believe that peer groups can be those places to cultivate resilience in us at this landscape of the world and the church in which we're living. We do need greenhouses. We need those places where we can come and gather intentionally to grow our own capacities of faith and skill and perspective, rather than just to rely on our own individual perspective or capacities. We need those places where we can talk about what is actually happening. And those people who will ask us the questions that ask us to actually name what's actually occurring. Both the joy and the pain of what's occurring. We need places where we can stretch our imaginations and our faith and our collective wisdom so that we're not just drawing upon our own reservoir, but we're actually asking someone to help us think through some possibilities or some options. We need places like greenhouses that will allow us to experiment and to try and to risk new actions, new practices. We need hot spots. We need those places where we connect with the deeper sources of our faith, where we connect with our deepest call to ministry and to work within the church, where we are able to renew that connection to that sense of call and revive it as needed. We need connections with our God. We need connections with other colleagues within the work of the church, so that we have the capacity to risk faith, to risk change, and to cultivate resilience.
There are three things that are necessary and that interact with one another to form a community of practice. there's a focus. And for us, the focus is ministry. Communities of practice are identified by their shared interest and their commitment to the ongoing development of competencies in ministry. There are common topics, common issues, common concerns in that focus. The second essential element is community. That we're about building relationships with one another, creating a safe place where people can show up fully and you can say whatever is on your heart, whatever you're struggling with, where the edges of your own knowing are, where your uncertainties are, as well as a place to really celebrate the things that are going well and the places where you see God. So developing those relationships is the second thing that's essential. It's also the knowledge. The third thing, the knowledge is practice-based, that it's based in experience. What is it that you're learning from what you're doing? How are you turning those failures into learning opportunities, as someone said earlier? So it's these three things together that create a community of practice. That there's a place to offer real care and support for our church workers. It's also a place where the practices of spiritual discipline are nurtured. I mean, it's a place where folks who are in the church really get to develop your own practices of prayer, and there are people who will call you to accountability for that. Many of our pastors say that their community of practice, they've discovered, is really one of the few places where they themselves get to worship, because freed of the sense of responsibility for keeping track of what's going on Sunday morning, they actually get to experience and to be part of a worship service and to praise God when someone else has taken the responsibility for it. It's also a place really to develop the craft of ministry and the leadership practices. We also, drawing on the work of Ron Heifetz, who's done really important work around leadership and dealing with the adaptive challenges, all those hard things that don't have easy answers in the church, that the communities of practice, our peer learning groups, are places for church leaders to get up on the balcony. And he makes a distinction between the dance floor, which is the floor of activity and all of the tasks and all of the relationships, all of the interactions that go on a day-to-day basis. But in a community of practice, it's time set apart when you can get up on the balcony to see the whole picture, to see the relationships, the interactions, the process that you can't even see when you're in the midst of it. It's a place to get up on the balcony. There's also, we're finding that communities of practice, that it's really fostering an understanding of shared ministry, where people are caring not just for each other as individuals, but indeed for the ministries in which they're all engaged. That people pray for each other's congregations. They pray for each other's patients if they're chaplains. And it's been just a really wonderful way of building a greater sense of our commitment to the wider church. We're also preparing for a church that we cannot even see or imagine yet. That it's in peer learning groups where people find the courage to take some risks and then a place to process them and to go back out and try something new. And somebody comes back and asks, so how did that go? What did you learn? And indeed, they get to learn from each other. You get to learn yourself, you get to learn from your own context, but you get to learn from the experience of others too. So many heads, many hearts, many minds are much better than one. One of the things that we would say that's absolutely essential is the development of a covenant. And we ask every peer learning group to really engage this question. Each individual in each group, what do you need this group to be and do in order for it to make a real difference in your life and ministry? What do you need for it to be and to do in order for you to make a commitment to show up every single time? And indeed, it's as that question, the answers to those questions gets fleshed out, that a group is built and members can hold each other accountable to that covenant, to that commitment they've made each other, and they can pay attention to when they stray away from it and how they can get back to it. The couple other things I would say is that the peer learning groups that we've discovered with all of the peer learning that's been going on across the country, across denominations, is that the word agency has been a really important concept. That it's not the synod, it's not the conference, it's not the denomination placing expectations around particular learning. It's really the group members in your own context of ministry discerning what it is that you need to focus on. What are the growing edges of your own ministry, your own congregation, so that indeed you have the freedom to focus on your own questions and to develop your own learning agenda. The other thing I would say, agency on one part of the polarity, but also accountability. We are accountable to our own calling. We're accountable to the other members of the group. We're accountable to our congregations. We're accountable to the wider church. And we are most of all accountable to God. And it's a place where indeed we can hold one another in that place, where we can notice if we're straying from that, where people can help us see when it is that we've lost our way, and there's a group of people who will take responsibility to call us back. There's a whole variety of communities of practice. The peer piece we are learning is important, so that it's pastors with other pastors, it's Christian educators with other CE directors, it's youth ministers with other youth ministers. Sometimes peer learning groups, they take for their learning agenda something very specific, like worship planning, or they want to read theological books together, like they got to do in seminary but found that they don't have time to do now. Or they want to figure out what does adult faith formation look like in the congregation, so that becomes the focus of a peer learning group. Where we live, that there are groups for intentional interims, groups of pastors of what we call turnaround congregations. They're churches that are trying to figure out whether or not they're dying or if they can come to new life. Groups of chaplains, folks who work in hospital settings. The groups that have a high quality group facilitator. So somebody who is holding the group and holding all the functions of what a facilitator needs to be, that those are groups that tend to thrive more fully. They have a formal group covenant, that's essential. They have an intentional group spiritual practice. We've talked about that. There is mutual trust and accountability. And this is an interesting thing, and I wanted to argue with this, but the research shows that groups that have more diversity among denominational membership, that they tend to be, there's some research to show that they're stronger. So just a couple words about the structure of a meeting. Each group gets to decide this for yourselves as part of the covenant. But our experience is that a time of intentional worship and prayer, something more than just a hymn and a prayer, but indeed a member of the group, or perhaps the facilitator, him or herself, has prepared something to offer to colleagues. Deep, disciplined check-in. Not just how is it going today, but really how is it with your soul? How is it with your ministry? An opportunity for focused learning around a case study or resource sharing or a topical conversation. And we really encourage groups to keep a running agenda of the things that you want to talk about, so that indeed people can even prepare as you're coming to your peer group meeting. What is it that we're talking about today? And then a review of the learning, to be sure that towards the end of your time together that everybody's talking about, okay, so what are we taking away from this meeting? What are the lingering questions that we need to bring up next time? What are the insights that we came to? If you shared a case study about your particular situation, what is it that you're taking away? But then all the other members, what are they taking away from it too, that they can continue to learn from? And a time of evaluation, a review of, are we spending our time together in a way that we said we wanted to? Are we living according to our covenant? And if not, What do we want to do about changing our practice? Or what do we want to change about our covenant?
Just as there's a structure of a meeting, it's also important to sometimes have structures to our conversations. And so I'm sharing this particular tool as a way to understand how to structure some conversations so we're touching all the bases that might need to be touched in a particular reflection upon and moving forward from an experience that people are having or sharing with one another. And use this as an opportunity to reflect on your work within the church, your own ministry right now, and ask yourself, what is it that you want to move towards? That's the goals part, the G, goals. What is it that you're really wanting to move towards? What are you feeling called towards? And then ask yourself, what's the reality around those goals? What's currently happening related to that goal or that calling right now? So on the one hand, I have these goals. On the other hand, these are some of the things that are currently happening around those goals. And then the O, the options. What are some of the options that you have before you? What are some of the possibilities that you have related to those goals? And list some things there for yourself. And then finally, after doing those three reflections on goals, reality, and options, then ask yourself the W question. Well, what is it that you will do moving forward? Is there one step that you will take? Some patterns in terms of how we have the conversations. So one pattern might be where all we hear about is what's currently happening, the R. We only hear about what's currently happening in someone's situation. And so we get a clear picture of how they're seeing what is happening. And sometimes we chime in with, ain't it awful? Oh, I'm sorry you're going through that. That must be tough or whatever. But I think that's important, and it's very critical for us to know what is actually happening. But we also need to also understand what their goals are. What is it they'd like to have happen? What is it that they're feeling called to do? So when we put the two next to each other, we have a more fuller picture. Sometimes we only hear what someone's goals are. And so it's important in a peer group to fill in the next piece. And so given those goals, what's currently happening? Or if someone's only offering us the R part, the current reality, then to be able to ask the question, well, what is it that you'd like to have happen? So that we interact with what is presented to us to get a fuller picture and perspective, but also to bring forth from the other what it is and to articulate and perhaps make more explicit what otherwise might be more tacit or more implicit in their understanding, to help them vocalize or bring that out. So we have both the goals and the reality, and we have that understanding. Sometimes we rush in with providing options. I call it, sometimes when I've observed it in peer groups, writing prescriptions for one another, kind of on the spot. And sometimes we rush in with prescriptions. Sometimes we try to fix someone's situation really quickly, and we're bouncing off of some of our own experiences as we do that. And that's not to diminish that part. It's important to be able to offer options to one another, but to understand that they're options that we're offering, not prescriptions. That they get to choose from the options what it is that they really want to do. But we really need to, as peer groups, practice the disciplines of listening to their goals and to the current reality before we start prematurely offering those options. Does that make sense to you? So the other thing is that the process feels incomplete to me unless we have some sense of what it is that the person is going to do. What is it that you will do next as a result of this conversation?